Welcome to the All Things Wildfire podcast, where we delve into the latest trends and hot topics in protecting properties against wildfire. So sit back, relax, and join us as we arm you against disaster.
Welcome, everyone, to another session of All Things Wildfire. And today we have what I'm kind of understanding for myself as a dynamic duo, honestly, and really just kind of interesting dynamic on really partnerships that can be very effective, I believe, in the fight against wildfire. So let me just jump right in. Today, joining us from CSAA is Jeff Huebner. He is the Chief Risk Officer. And Jeff, can you kind of introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what you do before we jump into what Zach does?
Yeah, great. Good morning, OP. So it's Jeff Huebner from CSAA Insurance Group. As the Chief Risk Officer, I try to make sure that we have the capital that we need to support the insurance risk that we're writing in places like Northern California. So CSAA Insurance Group may be a company that many of your listeners might not realize is actually the AAA insurance provider in Northern California, as well as other states. So we've got pretty heavy market share in Northern California and other areas. And so we've been tremendously impacted by wildfire over the last few years. And so my role is really to help us manage the wildfire risks that we have and bring capital to support it, and to think about how we can address the issues of wildfire so that we can support the AAA members who we insure.
I love it. And Jeff, thank you for being on. I know a lot of our listeners are, in the insurance world, they're homeowners, they're realtors. They're going to want to hear from you. And I know you have some good insight on how can they, exist in this new economy of insurance. So looking forward to hearing more about that. Zach, I'll get this over to you, my friend. Zach Knight with Blue Forest. He's the CEO of Blue Forest. And Zach, why don't you let us know a little bit about your company?
Yeah, absolutely, OP. Thanks so much for having us on today. So I run an organization called Blue Forest, and we're actually a nonprofit conservation finance organization. And in short, what that means is we bring together people, finance, and science to restore ecosystems and protect our communities. Our flagship product, the Forest Resilience Fund, was designed in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, and we largely focus on investing in our public lands to help restore them and reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire.
Awesome. So let me ask you guys, because I know we were talking offline earlier. You two met and thought, okay, this could be a very dynamic offering that could have a massive impact on preventing further wildfires. But can you guys, I don't know who wants to talk about how you guys met and how that relationship began to spark some interest.
Well, I'll start. So, CSAA Insurance Group, we got hit pretty hard, and our members got hit pretty hard in wildfires starting in 2015 in Valley and Butte, but then really hard in 2017 in North Bay fires, 2018, the Carr Fire and the Camp Fire in Paradise. And we recognize that we're a financial first responder from an insurance perspective coming in after a catastrophe to try to help our insured members and communities rebuild and recover after an event. What we wanted to try to do is say, hey, how can we go upstream and not just be financial first responder after an event, but how can we go upstream and try to be a part of the solution of preventing the severity of wildfires and or the frequency of them. And so we started to get to know Zach and his team. We were really intrigued with the work that he was doing. And so we started to join forces as early as 2018. So that's some about our motivation, and I'll have Zach share what he was doing and how we got together and which projects we were thinking about.
And Zach, before you jump in, I just want to add, I love the thinking of Jeff, you thinking upstream, because like you are a risk officer, right? Your job is to manage risk. And I think most of that, and I hope the listeners understand, someone who manages risk is always thinking about how to prevent. But thinking upstream is an entirely second step. It's another step of someone who could really put that kind of a risk manager hat on and say, okay, we're doing what we can here at this parcel level, whatever that is, or community level, but what else can we be doing? So I love that, Jeff. I think, more people in your position really can benefit from thinking upstream and seeing what else can be done outside of what they normally control to really create some innovation like you guys have just created. So, Jeff, thank you for that. Zach, I'll let you jump in, brother.
Yeah, OP, we got a great story from the very beginning. We founded Blue Forest in 2015, and the founding story really starts with a Peace Corps volunteer and a bond trader walk into a bar. And this issue for us of wildfire and restoring landscapes has always been something that was really close to my heart. But I worked on Wall Street for the better part of a decade and sort of had that realization of I need to be able to use that skill set to do something that I really care about. One thing that has always impressed me about CSAA right from the beginning is, when we first started raising money for our first project, and this was probably late 2017, early 2018, their chief investment officer, and they're a deca-billion-dollar insurance company, was willing to spend time and have a real conversation about a very small initial pilot investment. In OP, that really put us on the map as an organization to be able to bring in an insurance company and show how they can invest money, make a market rate return, and help solve this problem at the same time. That's been a huge part of the growth of Blue Forest. CSAA went on to lead our second transaction, and then Jeff and I can tell you a little bit more about the site visit and the conversation we had that ultimately led to the fund, the California Wildfire Innovation Fund, that I know we're going to spend a lot more time discussing today.
Boom. Man, this is good. This is good, guys. And I think maybe we can take a few different steps here. We start maybe at the educational initiatives. I know, Jeff, you at the community level and the homeowner level, you're educating homeowners on what they can do themselves to make their homes more wildfire resistant. Are there some tips that you can share now that CSAA is looking for? And then you can talk about, if you're extending any type of incentives or discounts that go along with that.
Yeah, happy to. So I'll tell you, one of my colleagues is on the board of the Institute for Building and Home Safety. And I know, OP, you've had a rep from IBHS on the podcast previously. We work with them to try to understand how does wildfire impact a home and what can be done to make a home more secure against wildfire. We're really interested in trying to promulgate the work that IBHS has done from a research perspective to try to bring it to our insured policyholders and to communities in general to help individual homeowners prepare for wildfire coming into their community and near to their homes. So the most important thing that I think you're very familiar with is the 0 to 5 foot range around a home, of trying to make sure that there's no combustibles in and around the home, so that when embers blow in towards a home, it doesn't catch on fire. I'd say if there was one thing to do, that would be the most important thing to do. And then there's other things like roof types. So I lived in California for 25 years, and I had a wood shake roof. That was probably not a wise choice whatsoever for somebody in a wildfire area. So taking steps around the home, to the home itself, and wider around the property is critical. Includes things like treating the landscape nearby. In terms of us as an insurance company, how we're approaching it is we're interested in providing the education to insurance as well as providing a financial incentive. So we provide up to a 15% discount to policyholders who have taken preventative steps around their home. And we provide an additional 5% discount when that homeowner is in a community that has also taken steps, such as becoming a FireWise community. And so we think that those two incentives work together. They don't necessarily pay for all the work. And so I want to be real clear that the work can be expensive, but it can certainly help a policyholder reduce the risk that they have and get some, in a sense, financial relief from that.
I love that. I think for a while now, Californians have been, they're up in arms about like, when is the insurance company going to identify that, I've done some work and I should get a discount. And really, I think, part of what we let homeowners know is the reality of, investing in wildfire prevention is helping you minimize your risk. Like that's first and foremost. And yes, you might get some sort of incentive, but the other benefit is you're likely going to be a better candidate for insurance, period, right? But I really do love the fact that CSAA is implementing these incentives because that's just another piece of the puzzle that homeowners can really begin to trust insurance companies. And I enjoy the fact that you've got the Department of Insurance is saying, hey, if you do these things, we have carriers that will identify it and provide you some sort of discount. I love the fact that CSA is part of that puzzle to make that happen. And to your point, yes, the homeowner will likely spend a little more than what the discount is worth, but I love that ability to step into the space of meeting the homeowner where they need to feel like there's an incentive from the carrier. So love that. And for you listeners in Northern Cal, you know who to call. All right. So and then the community level, I think that's another interesting thing too, Jeff, is that here in Southern California where I'm at, and probably other states like Colorado and Oregon, you probably have some communities that are kind of managed by HOAs, and it's not easy to get the community to be fire wise, but it really just does take someone. That's how it starts, with someone who's going to be a champion for the community to say, you know what, I'm going to improve my home, and I'm going to go to my neighbors and have conversations. And I really would encourage you neighbors to begin to have those types of conversations. And before you know it, you might have 2 or 3 different neighbors coming to your door, or joining your Zoom meeting to really understand what's happening, what people can do at the homeowner level. That's not very difficult, as Jeff has just explained, and really create a community that can benefit from more prevention measures, and then also with CSAA an additional 5%. So awesome. Love to hear that, Jeff. And so guys, let's now, Zach, let's talk a little bit more about the forest restoration piece and how that is impacting local communities.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, OP. So one of the things that we do at Blue Forest is we work with local partners, local NGOs, what's known as forest collaboratives, to help and support the plans they come up with to protect their communities, their watershed, their forested areas. In a state like California, with about 60% of our forest land being national forest system lands, meaning managed by the federal government, the U.S. Forest Service, they are our primary partner in the work that we do. We also try to get a really good understanding of who benefits from having a healthy forest. Obviously, we want to see a reduction in fire risk. We want to protect these communities. But if you have a healthy forest, you're going to have potentially more water, clean air, rural economic development opportunities, and a number of other things. And what we can actually do at Blue Forest and with our partners like the World Resources Institute is measure those outcomes and actually value them and help bring some of that value to downstream groups like water and electric utilities or flood control districts or state agencies or even corporates in some cases, and really help bring their resources to the table and allow them to pay for the benefits that they receive from these restoration projects. And I would stress to you, OP, it's not a when a fire comes through. It's not an if fire comes through, it's a when in this case. And so we want landscapes to be ready, and we want to take on those treatments, the thinning of small diameter trees, the prescribed fire and controlled burning events that reinvigorate the natural fire cycle and make the land resilient to the fire when it does come through. as well as trying to restore meadows, regenerate aspen where appropriate, and remove invasive species. So that's what you might see in some of these projects out in the forest that are designed to reduce the risk of a catastrophic wildfire escape and containment.
Now, question, Zach, I don't know if this happens to you or not, but sometimes with homeowners, me included, all of us, right? When there's a wildfire raging, you have my attention. I'm all about, oh my goodness, yes, my antennas are up for a few months. The fire's out. 6 months later, I don't even think about it anymore, right? And I guess my question is, do you come across, because you just said earlier, it's not if a wildfire happens, it's going to be when. And so that sense of urgency and being able to see the future is something that you live with, you understand it, we understand it. But do you have situations where the people that you're targeting have a sense sometimes that they forget that it's a matter of time before it happens? Or are they still also on the same track with you, understanding that that yes, it's going to happen, they have to do something about it?
Yeah, OP, it's a great question. The people that we work with are often not individuals. They're typically land managers, leaders of the utility, or a county supervisor, or someone at a corporate. So they really do well understand these issues, especially the local partners that we work with. A local NGO that is focused on watershed health or fire risk reduction, they're going to know that community better than we at Blue Forest will, maybe even better than CSAA will in certain cases. So we try to partner with those groups because they have that touch point on the ground. I would say just about everybody that we work with understands this as an issue of immediacy. And I think this is one of the reasons, when you take a step back and look at the sort of environmental impact bond marketplace or environmental finance, this is one of the fastest growing areas, because the premise of wildfire is something that brings people together, OP, that causes them to take action. And I haven't seen, especially not in the last 3 or 4 years, any sort of fade off in interest or focus on this topic, even after, the last 2 years in California have been relatively light fire seasons. And I've seen fire trucks going up towards Oregon, not necessarily the other way around. So even with less extreme fire seasons the last 2 years, I can tell you firsthand on the ground, this is still top of mind. And if we get good weather, we're going to be out there trying to do more prescribed fire work, right? So this absolutely is top of mind, especially with our partners at the state and federal government who are entirely focused on this issue.
Boom. I love to hear that. And Zach, we were speaking earlier and you'd mentioned, which I think the listeners would love to hear, you mentioned the difference between Northern California and Southern California, specific to the forests and the types of fires. And can you share a little more about those types of differences so we have a better understanding?
Sure. And I think this will be pretty obvious, OP, to a lot of your listeners. It's just something people haven't thought about a lot, I think. So I do like to call this out. When you look across Southern California, you don't see a lot of fires. What we often see are fires that are driven by wind, not by fuels. And if you look at a fire and it can, jump 16 lanes of the 101, there's not a lot that a fuels treatment is going to do. You really need to attack emissions. And in Southern California, what you'll see are ignition reduction projects, which are really looking at roadsides and other things to remove usually invasive grasses that don't hold as much moisture and really do cause fire to spread and get into areas that can burn. The opposite is kind of true in Northern California. Most of our fires are fuel-driven fires. We have forests that have, 10 to 20 times as many trees per acre as would be naturally occurring because of the history of fire suppression. So it's actually those fuels that allow what would be a healthy ground fire to get into these smaller trees, climb the ladder. They call them ladder fuels for a reason, and then become a crown fire that, as any firefighter will tell you, there's not much they can do once a fire gets to that point. The firefighters don't put out those fires. It's usually weather that does in those cases.
Roger that. Okay, great. That's awesome. I think, in California, we just say, oh, there's another wildfire. But the reality is there are different types, and so well spoken from the standpoint of, if you live in Southern California, you understand that these are wind events that are taking place, and that's what's causing the spread. And then this is the big caution of embers flying for miles into attics and at the 0 to 5 level. So great points. So gentlemen, let's talk about the Wildfire Initiative Fund that you guys are working on together. So I'll let you guys kind of share a little bit more about what that looks like.
Great. I'll start here. So as we said earlier, we were really interested in trying to say, hey, how can we move upstream and make an impact? And as you just referenced, OP, and as Zach was talking about, there's a fuels issue in Northern California. We looked at sort of the fire problem from multiple different perspectives to try to understand, hey, where is there work being done? Where are investments being made? And where's there work that needs to be done and investments that need to be made that aren't being fully lived into? From the firefighting perspective, if you think of the concept of the defense industrial complex, you can also think of the concept of a fire industrial complex. We looked at the space and we said there's lots of investment in firefighting, in resources to support that. Think of airplanes and helicopters and personnel to fight fires. I know just your last couple podcasts have been discussing some of those issues and some of those sort of investments in things like autonomous helicopters to try to put out fires after they occur. What we were looking at was how California and federal government have both expressed a commitment and a desire to each remediate 500,000 acres in forest each year for a total of 1 million between the two. And neither of the parties has been able to fully live into that 500,000 acre commitment that they've made. And it's hard work. We looked at it and we said, here's an area of sort of the wildfire problem that's underinvested in. And so how might we contribute to joining together with Blue Forest and creating the California Wildfire Innovation Fund to try to target some of that forest remediation work that needs to take place in the forests in places like Northern California. So that was sort of the concept behind it. And then Zach, do you want to tell the story about us in the forest and how we were looking at some of the issues and how we landed on developing the fund?
Yeah, Jeff, and I actually got to tell this earlier this week at a conference, so it's fresh and it's top of mind. OP, I think you're going to really like this. So we like to take our investors and our funders out to site visits pretty frequently over the summer, and I brought Jeff and a good chunk of his actually underwriting team out to see a project in which a restoration activities had recently taken place. And as folks may or may not know, when you thin these small trees, they're often put in a pile and burned, which we don't see as a great outcome, but obviously it's better than the entire forest burning down. So Jeff and I were looking out at a meadow restoration project, and there was a pile that was almost a football field long, maybe 50 feet wide and about 30 feet high, all in about 20,000 tons of material. And Jeff said, what's going to happen with that? And I said, I hate to say it, but I think it's going to get burned. And Jeff asked me a really simple question, which was why? And I said, well, there's a longer answer to that. But the short is we don't have enough contractors. The contractors we have don't have enough trucks to move this material. And even if we could move this material, we don't really have anywhere to take it. And that in and of itself, that systems level problem, OP, is what we are trying to solve with CSAA as a part of this California Wildfire Innovation Fund. So we really wanted to create a holistic plan that could start with investing in the harvesting to the hauling to the processing to ultimately the utilization. And what that really looks like is investing in contractor companies, being able to give them financing to purchase equipment or working capital lines against government contracts if they need to staff up at the beginning of the season. But it also means investing in sustainable forestry infrastructure where we can take this material out of the woods and do something with it that creates economic value, drives returns for investors, but also supports a lot of the rural economies that have been forgotten in this recent economic uptick. We also think it's going to make better carbon outcomes because this material otherwise would be burned And now we're able to put that into a wood product or create a fuel or something else from that that's going to offset a fossil fuel and really create, again, those better carbon and economic outcomes for the communities and really the entirety of the state of California in this space.
I love that. And exactly what really cool concept to actually, take, the fuels that you had to trim and cut and then actually utilize them again. Like what ideas or what uses are being thought of or actively being done, if any?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I feel really fortunate to be in the state of California because California's been a leader in this space of what can we do with this material, and the answer ranges from burning the wood and turning it into electricity, which is probably not the highest and best use of this, all the way to creating wood products, to creating things like renewable natural gas, biofuels, and even green hydrogen. So far, we focused largely on the wood products and investing in the contractor businesses. And I'll give you just one quick example, LP. One of the companies that we invested in was called Heartwood Biomass. They're one of the leading suppliers of post and poles for agricultural purposes, for growing hops, orchards, vineyards, etc. And they had a business in Oregon. Most of their clients were in California. What's really special about them, though, is that the wood that they use is all what's known legally as biomass. It's underneath 10 inches at the top, so it's very much small diameter. And they basically put that wood on a pencil sharpener and create these posts and poles, as well as a few other products. So it's a really great example of taking that material that would absolutely otherwise be burned, and not just burned and have that bad carbon outcome, but it takes firefighter capacity to burn this. If we're pile burning these giant piles, we have less firefighter capacity to do the controlled fire and the prescribed burns that we'd want to see happening on the landscape. So I want folks not just to think about carbon and economic outcomes, but the operational outcomes that something like this can really support. So that's an example of how you could utilize this material, clearly material that would be waste otherwise, which from an investment perspective means your input costs are incredibly low and you can have some pretty impressive margins on some of these businesses.
Man, this is exciting, guys. I can see why you guys, collaborate, but this is really so interesting. And I think more people should be doing this if they have the capacity and the partnerships to make that happen. So gentlemen, before we close here, is there anything that you want to share with the listeners before we head off? Some messages, some thoughts, some things to consider for our listeners?
Sure. I'll say, look, this is a complex problem and there's no one silver bullet. What we are interested in doing is sort of attacking the problem from multiple different perspectives, knowing that the impact we'll have, if combined with the impact of many, many other actors in the space, can all work together to make the problem a little bit better. As many of your listeners know, there's a real wildfire insurance related crisis in California. And so it behooves all of us to try to work together to try to say, hey, what can we do to make the environment a little safer, to make our communities safer, to make our homes safer, so that we can have a more sustainable insurance market as well. And so that's what we're working towards.
Boom. Zach, any thoughts?
Yeah, OP, one thing I'd say is we really focus on science at Blue Forest. And I do want to share there's really strong scientific consensus that these type of treatments really do reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. So we want to make sure that story gets out there and that folks are hearing that. And I also want to highlight that this is a space that's seen more public investment from the state of California, from our federal government. And it's really created tailwinds for us as we've looked into investment opportunities in this fund. I haven't ever worked in a space where there's this much money coming into the space and actually so few investors. Jeff and I are, not competing for deals in any way. I'm often going to other banks and trying to get people interested in these transactions because there's so few investors. And I think in a way, that's what makes this such a compelling opportunity, right? If we're able to invest in the capacity of a growing system, we're going to see more and more good investment opportunities, and we're going to create that virtuous cycle of creating value from this material so that more of these projects can happen, and we can really set ourselves up in this state for success when it comes to wildfire going forward.
Boom. I love it. And gents, I just interviewed Fire Marshal Daniel Berlant, Fire Marshal of California. So he's going to be on pretty soon, or the podcast will get out. But, I think all this collaboration of what he's been working on, dealing with the governor and dealing with the Department of Insurance, and all of this, trying to put everything together, in addition to what you guys are doing, there's so much going on behind the scenes that most people don't realize. And I love this conversation from the standpoint of really having a deeper comprehension of there are things still happening, even if you don't see them happening, even if you don't hear about them happening. There are innovators like you, gentlemen, that are really continuing to walk the walk, talk the talk, and see what you can do to make a difference. So I love it, gents. I appreciate you guys being on the show, and look forward to meeting you guys in person one day. I'm going to be up north here in a couple of weeks. So maybe I'll reach out to you guys and see if we can connect.
Hey, that'd be great, OP. And we'd love to take you out and see one of these projects or one of these investments.
I'm looking forward to that for sure. Absolutely. I'll reach out to you and we'll schedule something.
Great. Hey, thanks very much. Great seeing you, OP. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
That's all for this episode of All Things Wildfire. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to our show and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things wildfire. And as always, thanks for listening.